Dear students, today in the subject of business environment, topic we are going to learn is UNCTAD. UNCTAD stands for United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. As the name itself defines that this is a conference which is being held or organized by United Nations on the topic of trade and development. What is the significance of UNCTAD? What are the key goals or the activities being done by UNCTAD? What is the importance of UNCTAD in the world economics and global politics? All these kind of issues we are going to address in our session today. Before we shall go further and learn about UNCTAD in detail, first we shall define or introduce ourselves to UNCTAD. As you can see, that introduction of UNCTAD says that it is an authoritative knowledge based institution whose work aims to help shape current policy debates and thinking on development. It means it is a platform or a forum where the discussion, debates, research happens on the matter of development. It is not a body to execute the things, but it is a body to discuss and debate on the policy matters. To understand any institution or organization, we should know about the activities, the goal and the history of that institute, which can elaborate the nature of institute, achievements of institute and the significance of institute to us. Students, as I told you, to understand nature of institute, we should know about the key functions of institute. The major functions of UNCTAD are as follows. First, it functions as a forum for intergovernmental deliberations supported by discussions with experts and exchange of experience aimed at consensus building. Means it is a platform for a discussion, knowledge sharing and experience sharing for the developed and developing countries for the purpose of peace and prosperity. Second key function of UNCTAD is it undertakes research, policy analysis and data collection for the debates of government representatives and experts. Means for the step ahead of the discussion and debates, UNCTAD does its own research and data collection. They publish their annual reports and the reports are highly acclaimed by the economists and the various members of United Nations. World Investment Report and Trade and Development Report are the two annual reports published by UNCTAD. Third key function of UNCTAD is it provides assistance tailored to the specific requirement of developing countries with special attention to the needs of the least developed countries and of economies in transition. When appropriate, UNCTAD cooperates with other organizations and donor countries in the delivery of technical assistance. That means it goes a step further from a forum of debate and discussion, from a research house, it goes further to help out the countries which require special attention, especially the country of African continent which are very poor in economic measures. UNCTAD goes ahead and try to cooperate or play a key role to help them out in the technical assistance, in a policy framework and negotiation with the developed countries. The goals of UNCTAD are most important for us to understand the nature and the activities of UNCTAD. The three goals of UNCTAD are as follows. First is to to work as laboratory of ideas and to provide on the ground assistance to help developing countries raise living standards through trade, investment, finance and technology. Here again the goal says very clearly that they have to be the idea of laboratory, means working as a think tank or a forum for discussion, where they will elaborate the problems and find out the solution on the path of development with a special attention to the developing countries. Second key goal of UNCTAD is to help developing countries benefit from the globalized economy. As we are aware that since 20th century post World War, as we know that globalization has been the most eminent phenomena of 20th century world economics. Though globalization has the objective of reduction in the disparity, but it has failed to achieve the desired target. UNCTAD was formed on that ground only, and it has an intention to give the benefit of globalization to the underdeveloped and developing countries. Third main goal of UNCTAD is to contribute to international debate on emerging issues related to developing countries and the world economy, such as current global financial crisis, through major reports, policy briefs and contribution to the international conferences. UNCTAD plays a key role in forecasting the world economics by continuous research on the member of United Nations and the world economics, by which they not only forecast the coming problems, but also provide the solution for them. Here we complete the main goals of UNCTAD. Let us see what are the activities for United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The key activities of UNCTAD are subdivided into the 5 parts. These 5 parts are as follows. First, globalization and development strategy. Second, trade in goods and services. Third, commodity market development. Fourth, investment and enterprise development. And fifth is trade logistics and human resource development. We will elaborate all these activities one by one. First important activity is globalization and development strategy. It is subdivided again in the key parts, which are: first is identify broad trends and prospectus in the world economy, such as recent rise in South-South trade. As you know, North stands for developed countries and South stands for developing or the underdeveloped countries. UNCTAD continuously does the research on the global trade of international business. They forecasted about the business models which can help the growth of developing countries or underdeveloped countries, and for that they studied and identified the opportunity for the underdeveloped and developing countries into business. Another activity under the title of globalization and development strategy is to identify solution to the economic development challenge of African countries. Africa is a continent which is facing maximum problem on economic front. Most of its country are economically development challenge. UNCTAD works specifically on Africa and LDCs. Third activity is analyze the effects on least developed countries of international aid and of other efforts to promote development. In UNCTAD, they decided that certain amount of developed countries GNP would be given as aid to the underdeveloped countries and the developing countries. UNCTAD plays the key role in measuring, accounting and auditing that fund flow and the utilization of that fund in developing countries. Last activity under the title of globalization and development strategy is help with restructuring of developing countries' debt. Public debt for a developing country is a major crisis. With the help of international financial institutions like World Bank and IMF, UNCTAD try to restructure the debt of developing countries, which help them in getting their economy robust. The next activity is trade in goods and services. This activity is subdivided again in the following three forms. First is to assist developing countries in all aspects of the trade negotiations. Anytime when developing countries face any major problem in the trading with the developed countries, UNCTAD try to provide them technology, legal advice or advocate them on an international platform for their benefits. Second is analyze the impact of competition laws and policies on development. And third activity is to encourage the inclusion of environmental issues such as climate change and preservation of biodiversity in trade and development policies, where UNCTAD ensures that with the growth of trade and services, environmental issues does not come into the problem. Next activity for the UNCTAD is related to commodities. As we know, commodities are the major export source for the developing countries, and that is why it becomes a significant matter for UNCTAD. This activity on commodity is again subdivided in following three forms. First is to examine the factors influencing commodity markets. Second is help developing countries' efforts to achieve sustainable commodity exports. And third is help commodity dependent countries diversify their economies, as most of the developing countries are completely dependent on the commodity export for their international trade. UNCTAD provides them support on the policy framework, on the technology framework and financial platform, so that not only they can do the right negotiation for their commodities, they can take the legal advantage for their exports, but also they can diversify their economy and they can export higher end product rather than just exporting and completely being dependent on the commodity trade, which eventually help them is making their economy stronger. Next activity is related to investment and enterprise development. This activity is subdivided again in the following parts. First is analyze trends in foreign direct investment and their impacts on development. Second is help countries participate in international investment agreements, where UNCTAD tried to make a common platform for the two different nations, where they can come into the agreement for the investments, and which eventually help both the nations for the economic growth. Third activity is to advise governments on their investment policies through investment policy reviews and training, and help them to establish and observe international standards for accounting, as most of the developing countries has a major issue with the international law, exim policies and accounting standards. UNCTAD helps them in understanding international monetary policies and fiscal policies, and design their own fiscal and monetary policy in such a manner which can help them growing their international business. Not only that, UNCTAD also provides the review of their own policies on which they can decide any change or improvement in the policies as a future course of action. Also, for the requirement of the review of the policy, all the accounting methodology are also provided by UNCTAD to the developing countries. The next activity of UNCTAD is related to trade and logistic developments. As you know, the logistics plays a key role in the international business, but there are many countries which are like a small island or landlocked, or they have a bad relationship with their neighbor due to certain political reasons, which creates a major obstacle in their international trade. To ease that out, UNCTAD works a lot on the trade and logistic development. The main activities under this title are to partner with developing countries to address transport and trade facilitation challenges and opportunities. Second is technical assistance in trade facilitation, reforms and customs automation. And third is research in maritime and sustainable transport. This research in maritime and sustainable transport helps developing country managing their own merchant fleet and advancing their technology on the transport and the logistics. Last main activity of UNCTAD is related to human resource development. In this activity, UNCTAD is tried to build training networks and organize training in all areas of international trade, in particular for least developed countries, so that people over there can be trained related to international trade. They have the several ventures or sponsorship program for that kind of activities also. They are involved with the different organization, different civil societies and international bodies for this kind of programs. Apart from these main activities, UNCTAD is also involved in several special programs to achieve their main goals. One of the key activity or special program managed by UNCTAD is related to African and LDCs. LDC stands for least developed countries, where they especially focus on the African continent and LDCs. Areas of work under this special program are as follows. First is economic development of Africa. Second, research and policy analysis on LDCs. Third is specific development problems of SIDS and LLDCs. Fourth is trade and poverty in Africa and LDCs. And the last in this special program is technical assistance through enhanced integrated framework. Under this program, UNCTAD try to help the LDCs. They understand the problem over there and they provide the solutions for their problems for the economic prosperity. Here we understand the activities, goals and the special programs of UNCTAD. But the question comes in our mind, why UNCTAD came into the existence? If we go back to 1960, where UNCTAD was founded, we look at the global arena of that time, then we see that developed countries were flourishing and the disparity between developed countries and developing countries was getting widened. Due to this, United Nations decided to organize a conference for the trade and development issues. In this conference, UNCTAD came into the existence. The foundation happened in 1964, where the first United Nations Conference on Trade and Development was held. It held in Geneva. And given the magnitude of the problems at stake and the need to address them. The conference was institutionalized to meet every 4 years. So, before 1964, it was assumed that this is a one time conference, which was finally at the end of conference got institutionalized and decided meet of members after every 4 years and regular meeting of the representatives of the various governments. Raul Presbrick, the Argentinian economist who was representing Latin American countries in the first conference, was declared as a Secretary General of UNCTAD. From 1960 to 2012, we try to understand the key activities and events happened in UNCTAD, then we can divide it into 3 parts. First is of 1960s and 70s, second is of 1980s, and third for the 1990s to current arena. Look at the 1960s to 1970s. Here, in this time, UNCTAD gained an authoritative standing as an intergovernmental forum for North-South dialogue and negotiations. The major agreement which took place in this time were Generalized System of Preferences, which is known as GSP, International Commodity Agreements, Code of Conduct for Linear Conferences, and Control of Restrictive Business Practices. 1968 conference held in New Delhi, India, where the GSP was finalized. GSP is a process or a system where developed countries give the preference for a particular commodity which is being manufactured in a developing countries over the same commodity produced or manufactured by another developed countries. For example, if United States is importing a commodity X from developing countries and the same commodity X is being manufactured and exported to United States from a developed country, then the tariff would be either lesser or a zero tariff on the commodity X manufactured by developing countries. By this, they will get a competitive advantage in the developed countries market. International commodity agreements were several. In the 2 decades, the different commodity agreements were signed. One of the known is like International Sugar Agreement, where the developing countries decided and signed an agreement for the price stability of sugar in international market. Code of Conduct for Linear Conferences also helped them maintaining their merchant fleet, and Control of Restrictive Business Practices was an important agreement signed by all the UNCTAD members related to the restrictive practices on the international trade. Objective was to reduce the restrictions on the produce of developing countries. Apart from agreements signed in the first 2 decades of UNCTAD, that 2 major achievements were there. These achievements are as follows. First is defining official development aid, and second was identification of LDCs. In 1970, UN General Body decided that developed countries should contribute 1% of their GNP, gross national produce, to the developing countries. The complete definition of this official aid was done by UNCTAD, and in 1971 UNCTAD did the research on Africa and on LDCs, and they identify the exact countries which were falling in the list of LDC. They were the two major achievements of the first 2 decades of UNCTAD. In the 1980s, the key events were as follows. First, UN Conference on Least Developed Countries 1981. Second, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff 1986. And third the key event was Global System of Trade Preferences GSTP 1989. This LDC conference happened first time in 1981 and then consecutively it happened after every 10 years. The GATT was a major achievement of UNCTAD which brings all the countries on a common platform regarding trade and tariff barriers, and the global system of trade preferences helped developing countries to get higher preference in the international trade. In the current scenario from the 1990s to today, UNCTAD is continuously working with the positive agenda of the world economic growth, and the major events happened in the last 2 decades are establishment of WTO 1995, early warning of financial crisis. The global financial crisis which the world is facing right now was forecasted by UNCTAD. They said that the kind of monetary flow and the development activities are happening in the various countries are not on the track, and it might lead to a financial crisis, and which eventually happened. UNCTAD expanded and diversified its technical assistance, especially for the LDC and African countries, and the spirit of Bangkok 2000. In Thailand, the summit of UNCTAD 2000 was considered as a very significant, where the political drive or the political agenda was declared by UNCTAD members. Though UNCTAD has a history of 50 years, but it has not been able to achieve what it was designed to achieve. The major failures of UNCTAD are as follows. First, low official assistance. Second, declining share of developing nations in international trade. Increase in debt burden, increase in disparity, inadequate expansion of GSP, lack of cooperation between developed and developing nations. As we know that UNCTAD was formed in 1960 to reduce the disparity between developed and developing countries, but we see here that still the disparity is there, or even it is growing higher. Developing countries are losing their share in international trade. As we know, UNCTAD was conceived to reduce the disparity between developed and developing countries, but still we see that there is a huge disparity between the GDP size of developing countries and developed countries, and it is rapidly growing. GSP was a key achievement by UNCTAD, but unfortunately developed countries, either many countries the consideration for the GSP, or they have not added the lots of commodities or the product into the list of GSP, due to which the benefit of GSP has not been realized by the developing countries, and the developing countries are not getting the committed cooperation by the developed countries on the real ground. To make it successful, UNCTAD have received many suggestions from the eminent economists. Some of them are as follows. First is solid and effective policy. Second, adequate economic and technical assistance. Third, proper expansion of GSP. Fourth, increase in long term soft loans. And fifth, mutual cooperation among developing nations. By focusing on these parts, UNCTAD will be able to achieve for what it was conceived. Dear student, now we will summarize what we have learned in our session today on UNCTAD. We learned about the three key functions of UNCTAD, three main goals of UNCTAD, and the key activities of UNCTAD. We learned in detail about the various activities. Then we learned about the special program of UNCTAD, which is being held in Africa and LDCs. Further, we elaborated about the events which has taken place and agreement which has been signed in the last 5 decades of the brief history of UNCTAD. At the end, we learned about the several causes which has created the failure or obstacles in achievement of the desired target of UNCTAD, and suggestions made by various prominent economists to make UNCTAD a successful body. Thank you.